What if the man you were forced to marry was also the one who once destroyed you? Celeste Rivera thought she had escaped her haunted past until a powerful family dragged her back into a nightmare. Trapped in a web of lies, betrayal, and twisted love, she uncovers a shocking truth that changes everything. And just when it seems like there's no way out, a miracle forces her to fight harder than ever before. Can love be born from pain? Or is some damage too deep to repair? Where are you watching from? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more unforgettable stories. Celeste Rivera clutched the frayed strap of her worn backpack as the plane began its descent into New York. The city lights glittered like broken promises through the window, mocking the hope she'd once carried for a better future. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the fear coiling in her gut. She hadn't wanted to return. She'd fought hard to build a life far from the suffocating grip of her Aunt Vivian. But when the call came, everything shattered. "Come back here immediately," Vivian's voice had hissed over the phone, cruel and sharp like glass, "or your little sister dies." "Auntie, please. I only have one semester left. I'm about to graduate," Celeste had pleaded, holding back tears in the dim dorm hallway in Madrid. "Then graduate in hell," her aunt snapped. "Liana's life hangs on your obedience. One word from me, and the doctors pull the plug." Celeste didn't argue after that. She knew what her aunt was capable of. She had seen it too many times before. At only 19, her sister Liana had been in a coma for 3 years, ever since the car accident that claimed their parents' lives. The guardianship had fallen to Vivian. Technically a relative, but never truly family. Cold, conniving, and obsessed with power, Vivian had somehow inherited a sizable portion of their father's estate, leaving Celeste with just enough to survive abroad. Nursing school had been her escape. If she stayed in the U.S., Vivian would have crushed her dreams without blinking. So Celeste ran as far as she could and only ever looked back when it came to Liana. Now, she was back. The moment the wheels screeched against the tarmac, she regretted it. Passengers began standing, reaching for overhead compartments, laughter and chatter filling the cabin. Celeste remained seated, her body stiff with dread. She was just reaching for her carry, when a hand gripped her shoulder hard. Before she could scream, another clamped over her mouth. Panic exploded in her chest. She kicked out, but the grip was unrelenting. Her assailant dragged her down the aisle, away from the curious eyes of disembarking travelers. No one noticed, or maybe no one cared. He shoved her into a small lavatory at the back of the plane, locking the door behind them. The lights went off. She could smell him. Expensive cologne mixed with something darker, something feral. "Don't scream," he murmured, pressing something cold and hard against her temple. A gun. Her knees buckled, but he held her upright, his voice low and icy. "Do exactly as I say, or I'll end you right here." She whimpered beneath his palm, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you," he added, almost tenderly, but the weight of the weapon said otherwise. His hand released her mouth, but quickly found her waist. Her cries were muffled by the dark. She begged him to stop, pleaded for her life, but her voice was a whisper lost in the roaring silence. Time fractured. Pain tore through her body. She closed her eyes and prayed to vanish. When it was over, he didn't leave right away. He pressed a kiss to her neck and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." Then he was gone, just like that. The door clicked shut, and she crumpled to the floor, shaking violently. Her dress was ruined. Her soul was bruised. She stared blankly at the cramped ceiling, tears sliding down her cheeks. Her phone buzzed, a cruel reminder of reality. "Vivian. Vivian. Where the hell are you?" her aunt's voice boomed as soon as she answered. Your plane landed 20 minutes ago. Are you mocking me? Celeste swallowed her sobs, voice barely holding steady. I had... Hurry, you're not royalty. Click. Click. She washed her face, discarding the torn garment into the trash, hoping no one noticed her hollow eyes or trembling hands. A flight attendant helped her find her bag, but the world around her felt warped, unreal. Her legs barely carried her forward. And when she saw Vivian waiting outside the terminal, eyes cold, mouth curled in disdain, Celeste realized her nightmare had only just begun. Vivian Rise stood near the arrivals area with her husband, Harold, arms crossed and foot-tapping with barely veiled irritation. When Celeste finally emerged, dragging her suitcase behind her and eyes glassy from holding in tears, Harold marched forward and snatched the bag out of her hand with a grunt. You think you're some Veep now? He barked, already turning away. She probably thinks we missed her, Vivian added with a sharp sneer, her lips painted in her usual blood. Red, took your sweet time, Celeste. Celeste didn't answer. She couldn't. The assault still clung to her like smoke, choking her from the inside out. She focused on breathing, on moving, on not collapsing where she stood. The car ride back to their estate was a blur of Vivian's grating voice echoing in her ears. She ranted about how Celeste looked pale and disheveled, how she better not bring shame to the family, how everything had fallen apart since Celeste ran off playing nurse in Europe. Harold said nothing, just sipped from a silver flask and drove like the world owed him a favor. Celeste barely noticed the familiar streets until they pulled into the long driveway of the estate. Her heart sank when she saw it again, once a home filled with light and warmth, now reduced to a cold shell, paint peeled from the eaves. The lawn was overgrown. A lonely silence hovered over the house. Inside, things felt even worse. She stepped into the foyer expecting, hoping for one kind face. Nana Rosa, she called softly. But it was Tessa who answered, gliding down the staircase like a smug actress waiting for her cue. Dressed in a glittering crop top and designer jeans, her cousin looked every bit the brat Celeste remembered, only meaner. Oh, look who finally decided to show up, Tessa said, twirling a strand of hair. Welcome back to the land of disappointment. Celeste bit down the urge to retort. She was too tired to fight. She turned back to Vivian. Where's Nana Rosa? Vivian shrugged without care. Gone. Fired her months ago. Celeste's eyes widened. What? Why? She was useless, Tessa chimed in, sliding her phone into her pocket. Old and slow. We sent her back to whatever dusty farm she came from. Celeste's stomach turned. She helped raise me. She cared for Mom when she was dying. She was family. Your mother's gone, Celeste, Vivian said coldly, and I don't see her standing here to argue with me. Celeste's fists clenched at her sides. You had no right. I had every right, Vivian snapped. This house. That girl upstairs. Everything fell on my shoulders when your precious parents died. You think keeping Liana alive is cheap? And there it was. The transaction. The cost of breathing. Celeste's voice cracked with barely restrained emotion.
Why am I here, Vivian? Really? What do you want now?
Harold muttered, just tell her already. I'm tired of this soap opera. Vivian's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're getting married. Celeste blinked. What? You heard me. You've been selected for an arrangement. I'm not a prize to auction off, Celeste growled, stepping back. Oh, but you are, Tessa said sweetly. You're lucky, actually. He chose you. Who? Who? Vivian's tone turned icy. Damien Callahan. Celeste felt her breath freeze in her throat. She'd heard the name whispered like a curse. A man with power, connections, and a reputation soaked in blood. A man no one dared cross. You can't be serious. Vivian raised an eyebrow. Dead serious. He owns the hospital your sister's in. Refuse this marriage, and I'll make one call. Liana's gone. Celeste nearly collapsed then and there, but she caught herself on the edge of a table. No facility will take her without that support. There's no more money. Celeste, you drained it all on tuition and overseas living. Vivian stepped closer. Do you really want to gamble with your sister's life? Celeste turned to look at Tessa, who was taking selfies in the corner, and then Harold, sipping his drink like none of this mattered. Her world tilted. Her skin went cold. She swallowed hard. Who? Who is he really? Vivian exchanged a glance with Harold, then answered like she was announcing royalty. Damien Callahan. Billionaire, mafia ties. Cold as winter steel, but rich enough to buy salvation. Celeste's lips trembled. I can't marry a man like that. You already did, Vivian said, smirking. The papers are signed. The deal's done. And just like that, Celeste realized she hadn't come home. She'd walked into a prison. Celeste didn't sleep that night. She lay on the edge of the bed she once called her own, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, each one a silent scream echoing through her mind. The shadows in the room seemed thicker now, heavier. Everything had changed, yet everything was exactly as she remembered. Except now, the warmth was gone. She was no longer a girl coming home. She was a pawn, returned only to serve a purpose in a game she never agreed to play. The moment she closed her eyes, the man's voice haunted her. The scent of his cologne, the burn of humiliation, the sound of the door slamming shut. Her fingers dug into the mattress as she fought off the memory. She couldn't cry anymore. Her body was too tired for tears. A sharp knock startled her. Get up, Vivian's voice barked from the other side of the door. You've got 2 hours. Dress properly. He's coming. Celeste didn't answer. She sat up, her reflection in the vanity mirror catching her off guard. Her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes swollen and rimmed with red. She looked like someone who had been dragged through hell, and in many ways she had. Vivian didn't wait for a response. She pushed the door open and stared at Celeste with a look of disgust. My God, you look like you just crawled out of a ditch. Celeste said nothing. She didn't flinch. You're going to meet Damien Callahan today. You will wear what Tessa picked for you. You will smile. And you will not embarrass this family. This isn't a family, Celeste muttered under her breath, standing. Vivian ignored her and left the room. Moments later, Celeste stepped into the hallway, where Tessa waited with a smug smile and a crimson dress draped over her arm. I picked this out myself, she said proudly, holding it up like a trophy. Silk. Imported. Damien has taste, and you're going to show him that you can at least pretend to have some. Celeste took the dress silently, her jaw clenched. It was elegant, expensive, and far too revealing. The neckline dipped scandalously low, and the hem stopped dangerously high. But what choice did she have? She was a hostage in satin. Back in her room, she slipped into the dress with trembling hands. It hugged her too tightly, like it wanted to suffocate her. She stared at her reflection again, but this time, she didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. This wasn't Celeste Rivera, the nursing student who'd once dreamed of saving lives. This was a stranger, painted and packaged, dressed for a performance she didn't want to give. When she stepped back out, the house had been transformed. Flowers lined the entryway. A full spread of food graced the long dining table. Expensive wine sparkled under the chandelier light. Harold was already on his third glass. "You clean up well," he muttered, not looking at her. Tessa rolled her eyes. "Try not to scare him away." Celeste sat on the edge of the sofa, heart pounding in her chest. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. It felt like waiting for an execution. The rumble of an engine shattered the silence. "He's here," Tessa whispered, more excited than anyone should have been. Two large men in dark suits entered first, their gazes sweeping the room with precision. Then he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in black. Damien Callahan moved with the quiet confidence of a man used to control. His icy eyes swept the room until they landed on her. And held, Celeste froze. Her heart stuttered. That face, that jawline, those piercing eyes. Something about him clawed at her memory. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was calculated. "Nice to meet you, fiancé," he said in a low, deliberate voice. Celeste couldn't breathe. Her lungs refused to work. She was a deer, locked in the gaze of a predator. Vivian jumped up, her tone suddenly sugary. "Damien, what an honor. Celeste is thrilled to meet you." He didn't break eye contact. She doesn't look thrilled. Celeste finally found her voice. His smile widened slightly. Life is full of surprises. He walked closer, slow and purposeful. She could feel the weight of his presence, the tension crackling in the air. "Sit," he said simply. Her body obeyed before her brain caught up. Damien took a seat across from her, his gaze sharp, calculating. She looked toward Vivian and Harold, both waiting with the glee of vultures. "Do you know why I chose you?" Damien asked. Celeste shook her head. "Because you're leverage," he said flatly. "Your father owed my family a great debt. He's dead now, so it's on you." Celeste's hands curled into fists. "I never knew about any debt." "You don't need to. All that matters is you do your part. Marry me, and your sister stays alive." Her breath caught. "You're threatening me." "Call it whatever you like," Damien said, voice low. "But if you refuse, hospitals can be unpredictable places." She wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but she stayed. Because Liana needed her. And now Damien Callahan owned her life. Celeste sat rigid on the velvet-cushioned sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together was the only way to survive. Across from her, Damien Callahan leaned back in his chair, legs crossed casually, a crystal tumbler of whiskey, swirling in his hand, his eyes, those unforgiving silver-blue eyes, never left her. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, studied and dissected. "You're awfully quiet," he said, his voice smooth like poison dressed in silk. "I don't have much to say," she replied, her tone barely above a whisper. A flicker of something passed through his gaze. Amusement. Disapproval. She couldn't tell. He leaned forward slowly, setting the glass down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "I like honesty," he said, resting his elbows on his knees. "So let me be honest with you. I didn't ask for this arrangement either." Celeste blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "It was my grandfather's idea. He values tradition, marriage, power alliances. He made a deal with your dear Aunt Vivian behind my back. Told me you were the right choice. Said you'd be compliant." The word stung. Celeste's spine straightened. I'm not a pet you can train. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. Your fire under all that fear, I wondered. Celeste swallowed the lump rising in her throat. The conversation was surreal, like speaking with someone who had read the manual on manipulation cover to cover. But something else gnawed at her. That voice, that smirk. The way he stared at her with unnerving intensity. It was all too familiar. You said you didn't want this either, she said slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. So why go along with it? Because, he said, leaning closer, some debts aren't easily erased. And my grandfather isn't someone I defy without consequence. Besides, you intrigue me. Her skin prickled. She hated the way the words sounded on his tongue. Like he enjoyed breaking things just to see how they worked. Their gazes locked. His smile faded. You don't trust me, he noted, not asking but stating. I don't even know you. You will, he said. Sooner than you think. Before she could respond, he stood, towering over her. Celeste fought the instinct to flinch as he extended a hand toward her face. Instead of touching her, he tilted her chin up with one knuckle, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're going to be mine, Celeste, whether you like it or not. The words were soft, almost gentle, but the threat beneath them was unmistakable. Then he dropped his hand and turned away, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. We'll do things properly, he added. There'll be a ceremony. I don't believe in half measures. She rose slowly, hands trembling. I never agreed to any of this, she said, her voice cracking. He paused, glanced back over his shoulder. You did when you chose your sister over your freedom. The air left her lungs. She couldn't argue with that. I won't hurt you, he said suddenly. Not unless you make me. Her heart twisted at the phrasing. Do you always talk like a villain in a movie? She asked, a bitter edge to her tone. A laugh, quiet and short, escaped him. Only when the situation calls for it. Before she could muster another retort, he gestured to one of his men. Take her to the penthouse. She'll stay there until the wedding. I'm not a prisoner. No, he said, walking past her. You're a bride. Two suited men approached, wordless and efficient. Celeste didn't resist. Her legs moved on their own as they led her out of the house and into a sleek black car waiting at the curb. As it pulled away, she looked back through the tinted window. Tessa smirking from the front steps, Vivian sipping champagne like she'd won the lottery. She clenched her jaw. They'd sold her soul and toasted the profit. The city lights blurred as they drove deeper into Damien's world. When they finally arrived at the penthouse, she was ushered into a space that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. It was stunning. Vaulted ceilings, gold accents, a view of the skyline so perfect it looked painted. But Celeste didn't see beauty. She saw bars. No matter how soft the bed or how high the thread count, it was still a cage. And the man who put her here, he wasn't just her fiancé. He was the stranger who had stolen everything from her in the dark. The penthouse was immaculate, too immaculate. Everything was sleek and cold, designed for appearances rather than comfort. The walls were painted in soft grays, trimmed with gold, and the floor, too, with gold and the floor. Ceiling windows overlooked the glittering sprawl of the city. It should have been breathtaking, but to Celeste, it felt like a high-rise prison with a killer view. She paced the room, her heels echoing on the marble floors, her chest tightening with each step. She hadn't spoken during the ride up, and the guards who escorted her had said nothing either. Silent men in black suits, like statues that moved only when ordered. When the elevator dinged and they opened the door to her new home, they left her standing alone in the cavernous space, as if the weight of her silence was enough to dismiss them. Celeste stepped onto the plush white rug in the center of the living room and curled her toes into it, seeking some trace of warmth, some sign that this place could become anything other than what it was, a beautiful cage. A knock startled her. She turned sharply. The door creaked open, and in stepped a tall woman dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure with elegant precision. Her dark hair was pinned tightly at the nape of her neck, and her red lipstick was as sharp as her eyes. "Good evening, Miss Rivera," the woman said with a composed smile. "I'm Sabrina Vale. Mr. Callahan asked me to check on you." Celeste blinked, guarded. "You work for him?" Sabrina gave a short nod. "Among other things. Think of me as an assistant who ensures everything runs smoothly, including you." The way she said it sent a chill down Celeste's spine. "I don't need anything," Celeste replied stiffly. "I'm sure you think that," Sabrina said, glancing around the room. "But in this world, it's best to take what's given and not ask for more. I didn't ask for any of this." "No, but you're in it now." Sabrina approached with careful steps and set a white box on the coffee table. "This is for tomorrow. This is for tomorrow. There's an important dinner you'll be attending as Mr. Callahan's fiancé." Celeste stared at the box like it might bite her. "What if I don't want to go?" Sabrina tilted her head, studying her. A thread of defiance rose in Celeste's throat. "I don't care what he wants." "You will," Sabrina replied simply, "or life will become very unpleasant." Celeste's nails dug into her palms. She hated the calm, rehearsed way this woman spoke, as if she'd seen a dozen women just like her fall in line, as if she expected Celeste to break soon enough. Sabrina moved to the door but paused before exiting. "My advice: comply. Life in Damien's world is a lot easier when you do." With that, she slipped out, leaving Celeste alone once again. She walked over to the table and hesitantly opened the box. Inside lay a deep red silk dress, thin, form, fitting, and designed to cling to every inch of her. She lifted it with trembling hands, the fabric flowing like blood through her fingers. It wasn't a gift. It was a warning. That night, Celeste sat on the edge of the massive bed, the dress draped across her lap. The city outside glittered like it was celebrating her downfall. She touched her wrist absently, the phantom pressure of a gun barrel still etched into her skin. She hadn't said it aloud yet, hadn't acknowledged it even to herself, but she was beginning to suspect something too terrible to voice. Damien Callahan might be the man from the plane, the man who had destroyed her. Her stomach turned at the thought. The memory was fractured, disjointed. She'd never seen his face, only heard his voice, felt his breath, smelled the expensive cologne. And yet, it all lined up too perfectly. She stood and moved to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection stared back, pale, hollow-eyed, far older than the girl who had boarded that flight weeks ago. She didn't recognize herself anymore. A loud knock jolted her back. "Ms. Rivera," came a man's voice from behind the door. "Mr. Callahan is waiting for you downstairs." Celeste looked down at the dress in her hand. Her jaw tightened. She had no choice. Celeste stood in front of the mirror, the red silk dress clinging to her like it had been sewn from sin itself. It hugged her hips, dipped at the neckline, and shimmered under the soft lighting, like it had a life of its own. She hated how it fit. Hated how it made her feel exposed, like every inch of her body was a billboard that read, "His property." She took a shaky breath, brushing her fingers over the fabric as if that would help tame her nerves. A knock sounded at the door. "Ms. Rivera," the guard called again, more firmly this time. She stepped out of the suite, and two of Damien's men fell into step beside her, silent and robotic. The hallway was silent, save for the click of her heels and the echo of her heartbeat, thudding in her ears. She felt like she was being escorted to a stage or a slaughterhouse, maybe both. They led her to the grand dining hall. The moment the doors opened, Celeste's breath caught. The tables stretched long and elegant, adorned with crystal candelabras, polished silverware, and dishes so ornate they looked untouched by human hands. It was a feast fit for royalty. Every place setting was perfectly aligned. And at the head of the table, dressed in a black suit with his collar undone just enough to look effortlessly intimidating, sat Damien Callahan. He didn't rise when she entered. He simply lifted his glass and gave her a long, slow once-over, eyes lingering on her curves, like he was assessing a prize he already owned. Finally, he said, "I thought you might chicken out." Celeste said nothing. A server pulled out the chair beside him, and she sat stiffly, her back straight as a rod. "You look," he paused, tilting his head, "remarkable in red." She clenched her hands beneath the table, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Why did you call me here?" He swirled his wine before taking a sip. "Because we're going to be married. I figured we should have a civilized conversation before that happens." "Don't use that word," she snapped before she could stop herself. "I never chose you. I never chose any of this." His expression didn't change, but something dark flickered in his eyes. He set the glass down with more force than necessary, the soft thud vibrating through the table. "Celeste," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Accept it. I'm your life now. There's nothing you can do about it." The finality in his words sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw the wine in his face and demand her life back. But Liana's face flashed in her mind, her sister, pale and unmoving in a hospital bed, the beeping machines, the threat that hung over her like a noose. She had no choice. "Eat," Damien commanded, gesturing to the untouched food. "I don't want you starving." Celeste stared at the dishes, steak, truffle risotto, roasted vegetables, all beautifully plated and completely unappetizing. Her stomach churned, but she picked up her fork. Each bite tasted like ash. Damien watched her, silently, until finally he broke the tension. "You don't want this wedding," he said flatly. She looked up, startled. "Guess what?" he added. "I don't want it either." Her fork froze midway to her mouth. "Then why?" "I wasn't the one who chose you," he said, voice edged with frustration. "My grandfather did. He arranged the whole thing with your aunt. That story about your father owing us. That story about your father owing us. That was Vivian's little lie." Celeste's head reeled. She couldn't decide if she was relieved or furious. "Why not cancel it then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien laughed. A humorless, bitter sound. "In my world, deals aren't just canceled. My grandfather isn't just a man. He's a godfather. You don't break his word without paying in blood." Her lips parted to speak, but he stood suddenly, rounding the table. She tensed as he stopped behind her, the heat of his presence unsettling. "I won't force you to love me," he said quietly. "I don't need your affection, but don't even think about running away." She didn't turn around, didn't breathe. "You won't get far," he whispered. Then he walked out, leaving her alone at the table, the wineglass still trembling in his wake. 2 days passed. 2 days of silence, of unanswered questions and echoing footsteps in a penthouse that still didn't feel like hers. Damien hadn't returned since that night at the dinner table. Celeste tried to convince herself that was a good thing. She could breathe easier without his penetrating stare, without the tension crackling between them like a live wire. But it didn't mean she felt safe. It only meant she had more time to be haunted by his words. Then, just before midnight, the phone in the suite rang. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" "It's me," came Vivian's sharp voice. "Pack your things and get ready." Celeste's stomach dropped. "Why? What's happening?" "Haven't you heard?" Vivian snapped. "Your fiancé is in jail. Maximum security. Charges are everywhere. Media's sniffing. And if this wedding doesn't happen, well, already know what that means for Liana." Celeste's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you better figure out how to fix this. Fast." The call ended with a click, leaving Celeste's ears ringing and her heart hammering. Damien. Arrested. That couldn't be possible. He was untouchable, wasn't he? But if he wasn't around, if his protection vanished, Liana could be next. Vivian would make good on her threat. She always did. With no time to waste, Celeste threw on a coat and stormed out of the suite. The guards outside looked confused but didn't stop her. Maybe they no longer had orders. Maybe the entire chain of command had collapsed without Damien. She found Marco, Damien's trusted lieutenant, smoking outside by one of the black SUVs. "Marco," she said, her voice sharp with urgency.
Where is he?
Marco straightened, flicking the cigarette away. "Ms. Rivera, you should go back inside. I'm not leaving until you tell me where he is." He hesitated, eyes darting around like the walls had ears. It's not that simple. Celeste stepped closer. "My sister's life is at stake. Damien promised me he'd keep her safe. But if he's in prison, they'll come after her. I need to talk to him." Marco studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "He's in Rikers, isolation unit. Nearly impossible to access." "But not totally," Celeste said, voice laced with desperation. "Right?" Marco exhaled and nodded once. Gake glass in a sterile visitation room, her palms sweating against the phone in her hand. Across from her, shackled and bruised but somehow still exuding that same magnetic power, sat Damien. He picked up the receiver slowly, his eyes locking onto hers.
What? What are you doing here?
Her throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" she countered. He folded his arms, the orange prison uniform doing little to hide the tension in his frame. Things got complicated. She leaned in, her voice shaking. "Vivian says if this wedding doesn't happen, they'll kill Liana. I have men watching her." "Not enough," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "Please, Damien, I don't care what happened. I need you out. I need her safe." He stared at her, his jaw tight. Then suddenly, he slammed the phone down and stood, pacing behind the glass like a caged animal. She thought he was walking away, until he stopped, his fists clenched. Celeste's heart dropped. She couldn't leave him here. She had no idea how, but she found a way. She spent days begging lawyers, signing documents she didn't understand, pulling every string Damien's name allowed her to reach. The money bled from her accounts, fast and merciless. Then, one cold morning, the gates of the facility opened and Damien stepped out. No guards, No cuffs. Just a man stripped of his armor, walking toward her like a storm in slow motion. "You bailed me out?" he asked, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Celeste nodded, arms folded tightly across her chest. "I had no choice," she whispered. Damien studied her, silent, and for the first time since she met him, he looked. "You don't know what you've just done," he said quietly. She met his gaze without flinching. "Then explain it to me." They rode in silence. The SUV hummed softly along the highway as the city blurred past outside the tinted windows. Celeste sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her mind spinning with questions she was almost too afraid to ask. Damien sat beside her, shoulders tense, jaw locked, staring straight ahead. He hadn't said much since she picked him up outside the prison gates. Just a quiet thank you before sinking into the passenger seat, like a man walking back into the fire. Now, under the dim interior lights, she finally dared to speak. "Why were you arrested?" His eyes flicked to her, just briefly. Then he looked away again. "Assault," he muttered. The word hit her like a slap. Her breath caught, and her heart began to thud wildly. Damien's fingers drummed once against his thigh before he forced them still. "I don't remember everything," he said after a long pause. "I was flying back from overseas. Someone handed me a drink at the airport. I started feeling off, dizzy, hot, like my whole body was on fire. The next thing I remember clearly, I was waking up in a hotel bed, alone." Celeste's skin prickled. Her stomach flipped with nausea. Her voice trembled. He glanced at her now, frowning slightly. "Why?" She forced herself to keep going. "Do you remember anything? A woman? Crying?" "Begging you to stop?" Damien stiffened, his face paling. "There were flashes," he said. "Screaming. A hand covering a mouth. But I thought it was a dream, a nightmare." Celeste turned away, her hand pressed to her chest to keep it from splitting open. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. He didn't remember, but she did. Before she could respond, Damien's phone buzzed in the cup holder. He picked it up. "Boss," said a gruff voice on the other end. "I found her. The woman from the plane." Celeste froze. Damien straightened. "Who is she?" Before the voice could answer, the line cut out. "Damn it," he growled, slamming the phone down. Celeste's ears rang. Her thoughts spiraled. If he thought someone else was the woman from that night, what would happen when he found out the truth? When he realized it wasn't just a stranger he'd hurt, but the woman sitting inches from him? The SUV turned off the highway and headed back toward his mansion. Damien said nothing, and neither did she. When they finally pulled into the gated driveway, Celeste stepped out quickly, needing air, needing space, needing anything but this suffocating confusion. But she didn't make it far. The front door opened before she even reached it. And there, standing with a smug tilt of her head, dressed in designer clothes and a gleam of triumph in her eyes, was Tessa. "Oh, Celeste," she purred, smiling like a snake. Damien strode forward. "What are you doing here?" Tessa flipped her hair over her shoulder. "I'm the woman from the plane, remember?" "Isn't that what your men discovered?" Celeste's heart plummeted. Her entire body went cold. No, this wasn't happening. Damien's eyes narrowed. Is that true? Tessa stepped closer, placing a manicured hand to her chest like an actress in a melodrama. Of course. You said you were sorry, that you didn't mean for it to happen. But Damien's expression didn't soften. He turned toward Celeste just for a second. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes wide, her shoulders trembling. Then he looked back at Tessa. If you were really that woman, he said, voice quiet but sharp as glass, tell me what I said right before I left. Tessa hesitated. Just for a blink. You said you were sorry, she repeated, and that you didn't want to hurt me. Damien's face darkened. That wasn't the last thing I said. He turned slowly to Celeste. She was shaking now, visibly. And in that moment, everything connected. The dress. The fear in her eyes at the dinner table. The way she'd asked him, over and over, about that night. The hospital visit. Her collapse in his arms. The way she flinched whenever he got too close. Oh, God, he breathed, his voice hollow. It was you. Celeste didn't respond. She didn't have to. The truth was written all over her face. The silence that followed was deafening. Celeste couldn't lift her eyes. Her fists clenched at her sides and her whole body trembled, not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, pain, rage, exhaustion. Across the room, Tessa still stood with that smug, practiced smile on her lips, as if her performance had gone off without a hitch. But Damien was no longer looking at her. His gaze remained fixed on Celeste, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked like the floor had been ripped out from under him. It was you, he repeated, softer now, like saying it too loudly would destroy them both. Celeste lifted her chin, her voice barely holding steady. Yes, she whispered. It was me. I was the woman on that plane. Damien took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid to come closer. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes burned. Would it have mattered? Tessa let out a scoff. Clearly irritated, her act had failed. This is ridiculous. You're seriously going to believe her over me? Damien turned, his voice cold and sharp. You tried to be her. I was her, Tessa insisted, stepping forward. I was trying to protect you. If people found out what really happened, do you know what they'd say? I was covering for you. You were lying, Celeste snapped, her voice suddenly firm. Lying to make yourself look like the victim, like you deserved him, but you don't. You never did. Tessa's eyes narrowed, her voice venomous. Oh, grow up. You act like you're the only one who's ever suffered. Celeste took a breath, one that filled her lungs with enough fury to make her words sharp. You used what happened to me as a stepping stone to a richer life. You manipulated everyone. You manipulated everyone. You sent me into a nightmare, then tried to replace me in it. Tessa lunged as if to grab her, but Celeste stepped back just in time. Enough, Damien growled. The room fell still. He looked at Tessa with an expression so cold it could have frozen fire. You lied. You conspired with Vivian. You stole from her life, her dignity, and nearly her sister. Tessa tried to speak, but no words came. Behind her, the front door opened, and in walked two of Damien's men, flanking someone between them. Vivian, disheveled, furious, and wild-eyed, she fought against the men's grip. What the hell is this? Damien, what are you doing? Justice, he said simply. Vivian laughed bitterly. You think you're some hero now? I made this deal happen. I kept Liana alive when no one else could. You kept her alive to control Celeste, Damien countered. You exploited her grief and trapped her in a life she never agreed to. Vivian's mask cracked, her fury slipping through. You would never even looked at her if it weren't for me. You think she's special. She's nothing. A nurse with a sob story. Celeste's voice cut through the air.
She's my sister, and I'm not nothing.
Vivian froze, eyes narrowing on her like a snake preparing to strike. You'll regret this. No, Damien said, stepping between them, his voice like a final nail in a coffin. You will. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a stack of documents, thick and heavy. Bank records. Fraud. Wire transfers in Tessa's name. A complete paper trail of how you stole from the Rivera estate and tried to con me into marriage with your niece. Vivian paled. We're not pressing charges, Damien added. We're filing them, right now. The moment the words left his mouth, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room. Vivian Rise and Tessa Reyes, one of them said, voice formal. You are under arrest. Chaos erupted. Tessa screamed, trying to break free. Vivian shrieked, swearing vengeance on everyone in the room. But the officers were swift, practiced. Handcuffs clicked. Struggles were silenced. Celeste stood frozen, watching the 2 women who had caused her so much pain dragged out of her life. Damien moved beside her, his hand brushing hers. Gentle, unsure. She didn't pull away. As the front door slammed shut, Celeste turned to him. Is it really over? Damien met her eyes. It is now. You're free. For the first time in what felt like forever, Celeste allowed herself to believe it might be true. The silence after Vivian and Tessa were taken away was strange. Still heavy, but quieter than before. Like the storm had passed, leaving behind only debris and aching relief. Celeste stood in the center of the grand foyer, surrounded by luxury she had never asked for, her breath shallow as she tried to process what had just happened. Her hands were still trembling. Her heart still pounding. It was over. But something inside her refused to believe it. Her body had been braced for pain for so long, it didn't know how to relax. She closed her eyes, as if shutting out the sight of the mansion would help her find calm. Then everything went sideways. Her knees buckled without warning, and the room tilted sharply. A rushing in her ears drowned out Damien's voice calling her name. She felt his hands catch her just before she collapsed, his arms strong and trembling with panic. Her skin had gone clammy, her pulse weak. Celeste. Hey. Stay with me, Damien said urgently, cradling her as if she might slip away if he loosened his grip. She couldn't speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came. We need a doctor, Damien shouted, his voice echoing as he carried her out of the house and into the waiting car. Every second felt like an eternity. She saw flashes of light, blurred faces, Damien's voice low and terrified as he whispered promises she couldn't quite hear. By the time she opened her eyes again, all she saw was white, a hospital ceiling, the familiar antiseptic scent, and Damien, slumped in a chair beside her bed, head in his hands, his suit wrinkled like he hadn't moved in hours. His fingers were still wrapped around hers. As if sensing her stir, he jolted upright. Celeste, he breathed, relief flooding his face. She gave a faint smile. What happened? You passed out, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Your body's been through too much. Stress, no sleep. Everything caught up to you. She nodded slowly. That made sense. She felt like she'd been carrying the weight of 1,000 lives. Damien reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You won't," she said softly. "Not now." Just then, the door opened and a doctor stepped in, flipping through a chart. He looked up and smiled when he saw her awake. "Ms. Rivera, you gave us quite the scare," he said. "But you're stable now." She nodded. "Thank you." The doctor glanced at Damien, then back at her. "We ran some blood work while you were unconscious. Everything looks good. And congratulations." Celeste blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" "You're pregnant," he said, with a kind smile. "About 9 weeks along." The room went completely silent. Celeste stared at him, unsure she'd heard right. Her heart lurched. She turned slowly to Damien, who looked just as stunned. His lips parted, his eyes searching hers like he was trying to read her thoughts. "A baby," he whispered, almost to himself. She nodded slowly, tears stinging her eyes. "A baby." He leaned back in the chair, raking a hand through his hair. For the first time in all the chaos, he looked completely disarmed. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not his usual smirk, not the mask he wore so well, but something softer, almost boyish. "We're having a baby," he said again, in awe. Celeste stared down at her hands, her fingers still trembling. "I don't know what to do." Damien reached over and gently cupped her face. "You don't have to figure it out alone. I'm here. I'll protect you. Both of you." A fresh wave of emotion surged in her chest. Not fear this time, not dread. Something else, something warmer. Something warmer. Something terrifying in its own right. Hope. And then, just as she was about to speak, the door burst open. A nurse rushed in, out of breath, eyes wide with excitement. "Ms. Rivera," she said, nearly breathless. "Your sister, Liana." Celeste's entire world stopped. She sat up too fast, ignoring the ache in her body.
What?
"She came out of her coma," the nurse said, tears in her own eyes. "She asked for you." Celeste threw off the blankets, her legs weak beneath her. Damien jumped up to steady her. "You're pregnant," he reminded her gently. "Let me help." She didn't resist. Holding his hand tightly, she walked toward a miracle she'd almost stopped believing in. Her baby, her sister, her freedom, all in the same breath. The walk down the hospital hallway felt endless. Celeste leaned on Damien as her legs fought to keep up with her racing heart. Each step was fueled by hope and fear. Hope that her sister was really awake after all these years, and fear that it was just another dream she would be forced to wake from. Nurses smiled as they passed, some nodding at Damien in recognition, but Celeste barely noticed. The only thing she could see was the door at the end of the hall, with her sister's name printed neatly on the small placard. Room 212. Her fingers tightened around Damien's as she paused in front of it. "What if she doesn't remember me?" "She will," Damien said gently. "You never left her." She nodded, took a breath, and pushed the door open. The world slowed. Liana lay in bed, the sun through the window, casting a soft glow on her pale face. Her eyes, those same soft brown eyes Celeste remembered from their childhood, were open, flicking slowly toward the sound of the door. For a moment, she looked confused. Then her lips moved. "Celeste?" A choked sob tore from Celeste's throat. She rushed forward, nearly collapsing beside the bed, grasping her sister's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. "I'm here," she whispered, tears falling freely. "I'm here, Liana. I'm not going anywhere. Liana blinked slowly, her voice hoarse and weak. You look? Celeste laughed through her tears. You're one to talk. You've been sleeping for 3 years. That pulled a soft, fragile smile from Liana. I missed you more, Celeste whispered, kissing the back of her sister's hand. So much. Behind her, Damien lingered near the door, watching silently, respectfully. When Celeste turned to look at him, her eyes were red but shining. She gave a small nod, wordless gratitude passing between them. He stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Liana's gaze flicked to him. Who's that? Celeste hesitated, her voice soft. That's Damien. Hey. Liana's brow furrowed a little, then relaxed. He's handsome, she mumbled, and Celeste couldn't help but laugh, the sound raw and real. He's also a pain in the ass, she teased, and Damien grinned. The nurse gave them a few minutes before reminding Celeste that Liana needed rest. Reluctantly, she stood, brushing her fingers gently over her sister's forehead. I'll come back soon, she promised. You better, Liana murmured, her eyes fluttering shut. Back in the hallway, Celeste leaned against the wall, breathless. Damien stood beside her, his hand resting protectively at her back. She's really awake, Celeste said, as if saying it again made it more real. You brought her back, Damien replied. All those years you never gave up. Celeste turned to him, emotion swelling in her chest. They returned to the mansion 2 weeks later. Liana was transferred to a private rehabilitation center with Round, the clock care. Celeste visited her every day, and at home, another kind of chaos unfolded, one full of cravings, mood swings, and unexpected joy. Pregnancy, she discovered, was no quiet miracle. One morning, Celeste lay sprawled on the bed, a pillow tucked under her stomach, groaning dramatically. I want green mango with peanut butter. Damien, who was attempting to assemble a baby bassinet in the corner, froze. It's 8:00 a.m. I don't care, she moaned. I want it. He blinked at her, tools in hand.
Are you sure that's a thing people eat?
I'm growing a human. I can want anything. He sighed, setting down the screwdriver. Fine. Mango. And fried fish. With ice cream. He stared at her. You're trying to kill me, aren't you? She gave him the most innocent smile she could manage. You promised to protect us. He muttered under his breath, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. You better still love me when I come back smelling like 5 restaurants. I'll think about it, she called after him. She was still laughing when he returned an hour later, juggling paper bags and looking like he'd just survived a war zone. He laid out the food, grimaced as she dipped mango into peanut butter, and nearly lost his mind when she actually enjoyed it. Later, as they lay curled together on the couch, her head on his chest, his hand on her belly, Damien whispered, I didn't think I was capable of this. Of family. Celeste smiled sleepily. Turns out you are. And in the quiet hum of the evening, their hearts beat not just for each other, but for the new life growing between them. A second chance neither of them had seen coming. Celeste gripped the side of the hospital bed, her fingers turning white, sweat pouring down her brow as another contraction ripped through her. The room was a flurry of movement. Nurses calling out instructions, machines beeping, bright lights shining down on her like a spotlight she never asked for. She didn't care about any of it. All she could think about was the searing pain and the fact that Damien was nowhere in sight. Where is he? She hissed between clenched teeth, her voice strained. He's pacing outside, Stephanie said, standing beside her, brushing back Celeste's damp hair. The doctor told him to stay calm, and I swear I saw him mumbling prayers. Celeste let out a ragged laugh. As if summoned by threat alone, the door burst open, and Damien stumbled in, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 30 minutes. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were wild with panic. "I'm here," he gasped. "I'm here. I swear I didn't go far. I was just—"
"Shut up and hold my hand,"
Celeste screamed as another wave of pain hit. He rushed to her side and grabbed her hand. She immediately squeezed it so hard he let out a yelp. "Ow. Okay, wow. You're strong. This is your fault," she growled, eyes blazing as she glared at him. I know, he said quickly, trying to stay calm. "You're right. All of this is my fault. I swear I'll never touch you again. I'll live in the guest house. Just please breathe." The doctor chuckled from the end of the bed. "We're almost there. One more push, Celeste." She took a deep breath and pushed with everything she had. Pain. Fire. Pressure. And then, a cry. The room stilled for a moment as the sound of a newborn's first breath filled the air. Celeste collapsed back onto the pillows, tears streaming down her cheeks. Damien stood frozen as the doctor lifted the tiny, red-faced baby and handed her to the nurse to be cleaned. "It's a girl," the nurse said, with a smile. Damien blinked. A girl." Celeste looked up at him, exhausted but glowing. "We have a daughter." The nurse brought over the small bundle, now wrapped in a pink blanket, and gently placed her in Celeste's arms. She stared down at the tiny face, the wrinkled little hands, and her heart cracked wide open.
"I baby,"
she whispered, her voice trembling.
Whoa!
Damien leaned in slowly, unsure if he was worthy of holding something so small and perfect. She's everything." Celeste looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Want to hold her?" He nodded, and she placed the baby into his arms. He stared down at his daughter like he'd just been handed the whole universe. "I never thought I'd get this," he whispered. "A family. A real one." "One you built," Celeste said, reaching for his hand. "One we built." A year later, the mansion was filled with laughter and sunlight. Pink balloons floated over the garden. Music played from hidden speakers, and the scent of fresh pastries lingered in the air. Friends and family gathered under white canopies, all to celebrate the first birthday of Liana Rivera Callahan. Celeste stood in the garden, her daughter in her arms wearing a tiny tiara and a pink tutu. Liana giggled as her father fussed over the cake, adjusting the letters to make sure they were perfectly aligned. "Lucas," Celeste teased, "you don't need to fix the cake 3 times. She's one. She just wants to smash it." "It's not for her. It's for the pictures," Damien muttered, then grinned. "But okay. Fine, let her smash it." Stephanie appeared beside them, holding a tray of cupcakes. Celeste laughed. Sleep-deprived and sticky with mashed bananas. Living the dream. When it was time to sing, Damien took Liana in his arms, lifting her above his head like she was the crown jewel of the world. "I used to think I didn't deserve a family," he said to the crowd, "but then Celeste came into my life and showed me I was wrong. You gave me everything, love. You and our little girl. You saved me." Celeste's eyes brimmed with tears as he turned to her, his voice softer. "I love you, Celeste. Thank you for being my home." She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around both of them. "We're a long way from where we started," she whispered, "but I wouldn't trade any of it." And as laughter and music swirled around them, she knew, without a doubt, they'd finally found their forever. Life lesson from Celeste and Damien's story. Celeste and Damien's journey teaches us that healing is not linear, and neither is love. From betrayal, fear, and manipulation came strength, growth, and the most unexpected redemption. Celeste endured unimaginable trauma, yet she fought not just for survival, but for her sister, her unborn child, and ultimately for herself. Her courage was quiet but unbreakable. Damien, a man once feared for his power and ruthlessness, was forced to confront the darkest part of himself. His transformation wasn't instant or easy, but it was real. He chose accountability. He chose change. And in doing so, he earned something he never thought he deserved: love, forgiveness, and family. This story reminds us that people can evolve when given a reason, a purpose, and a second chance. And it proves that even in the worst of circumstances, love, when it's sincere, has the power to rebuild what's broken, redeem what's lost, and create something beautiful from pain. No matter where you come from or what you've been through, your story is not over. You are allowed to rewrite it. If you found this story powerful or inspiring, we'd love to know. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you'd like to follow more emotional, dramatic stories like this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter.